The stars looked cold and distant as Commander Velthera stared out from the bridge of her ship. The void. Whisper moved through space like a ghost, its advanced engines making no sound in the empty darkness. Her silver skin reflected the soft blue lights of the control panels around her. She had been hunting for 3 days now, looking for something that should not exist. "Commander," called her scanner officer, his voice tight with excitement. "I have found something. There is a ship ahead. It appears to be damaged." Velthara turned her large, dark eyes toward the main screen. The image showed a strange vessel floating in space. It was not like any ship she had seen before. Where her own ship was smooth and curved like flowing water, this one looked rough and angular. It had sharp edges and thick armor plating. Scorch marks covered its dark metal hull and several sections showed signs of battle damage. "What species built this thing?" she asked, moving closer to the screen. "Unknown, Commander. The design is primitive. Very primitive. But there are life signs aboard. Approximately 800 beings." Velthara felt a mix of curiosity and satisfaction. For months, the Galactic Hegemony had been receiving strange reports from the Outer Rim territories. Ships had gone missing. Trade routes had been disrupted. Some spoke of a new species that fought with unusual tactics. Most dismissed these reports as rumors or the work of pirates, but Velthara had been sent to investigate. She commanded one of the most advanced reconnaissance ships in the galaxy. The Void Whisper could scan a planet from 3 light-years away and map every building on its surface. If there was a new species out here, she would find them. "Are they responding to our presence?" she asked. "No, Commander. The ship appears to be powerless. All energy signatures are minimal. It looks like they suffered severe damage in whatever battle they fought." Velthara smiled, showing rows of small, sharp teeth. This was perfect. A disabled ship full of this unknown species would give her everything she needed. She could study their technology, learn their weaknesses, and report back to the hegemony with complete intelligence. "Prepare the bioneural probe," she ordered. "We will learn everything about these creatures." Inside the damaged human warship, Captain Dongwu sat quietly in his command chair. The bridge around him was dark except for a few emergency lights. His crew worked silently at their stations, their faces calm and focused. To anyone watching, they would look like survivors of a terrible battle, struggling to keep their ship running, but appearances could be deceiving. "Sir," whispered Communications Officer G1, her voice barely audible. "The alien ship is moving closer. They have stopped exactly where we expected them to." Dongwu nodded slowly. Everything was going according to plan. The Iron Mountain was not damaged at all. The scorch marks on her hull had been painted on 3 weeks ago. The energy readings that made them appear powerless were being carefully controlled by Chief Engineer Hyejin from her station deep in the ship's belly. The Iron Mountain was one of humanity's newest warships, but she had been built to look old and crude. Her weapons were hidden behind fake armor plating. Her engines were designed to appear primitive while being more advanced than anything the aliens possessed. Most importantly, her crew had been training for this moment for over 2 years. "Weapons Officer Taeho," Dongwu said quietly into his headset. "Status report. All weapon systems are ready, sir," came the whispered reply. "Plasma cannons are charged and waiting. Missile tubes are loaded. Point defense systems are online but hidden. We can destroy their ship in under 30 seconds if needed." "Good, but remember, our mission is not to destroy them. We need them to probe us. We need them to think they understand us." Dongwu had been chosen for this mission because of his patience. Many human commanders would want to attack immediately, to show these aliens the power of human weapons. But Dongwu understood that sometimes the greatest victory came from appearing weak when you were strong. Tactical Officer So Young spoke softly from her station. "Sir, I am detecting energy patterns consistent with a bioneural probe. They are preparing to scan our ship." "Perfect," Dongwu replied. "Begin Operation Mirror Box." Across the ship, crew members began activating carefully prepared systems. Medical Officer Yujin started feeding false biological data into the ship's computers. Security Chief Minho enabled programs that would guide any alien probe through predetermined paths. Ship's Counselor Young activated psychological profiles that had been specially written to confuse and terrify anyone who read them. The humans had spent decades preparing for first contact with alien species. They had studied every possible scenario, planned for every type of encounter. What they had learned was that most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were peaceful, logical, and predictable. They solved problems through negotiation and compromise. Humans were different. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, learning new ways to wage war, discovering how to turn anything into a weapon. When humanity finally reached the stars, they brought with them knowledge that most species had forgotten or never learned. On the bridge of the Void Whisper, Velthara watched as her bio-neural probe launched from the ship. The probe was a marvel of technology, able to interface directly with any computer system or biological neural network. It would slip into the alien ship undetected and copy everything: their memories, their technology, their culture, their weaknesses. Probe has successfully penetrated the target vessel, reported her scanner officer. It is beginning deep analysis now. Excellent, Velthara said. How long until we have complete intelligence? Approximately 4 hours, Commander. The probe will map their entire information network and extract all relevant data. Velthara settled back into her command chair. In 4 hours, she would know everything about this new species. She would learn how they fought, how they thought, and most importantly, how they could be defeated. The galactic hegemony had conquered dozens of worlds using this exact method. What Velthara did not know was that the humans were watching her probe every step of the way. Engineer Jinho monitored its progress from the engine room, carefully allowing it access to certain systems while blocking it from others. Navigator Sung Ho fed it false star charts that would lead any invasion fleet into carefully prepared traps. The probe began its work, copying what it thought were the ship's databanks. It found records of human history, but not the real ones. It discovered technical specifications for human weapons, but not the actual ones. Most importantly, it started accessing what appeared to be the personal files and memories of the crew. Captain Dongwu smiled as he watched the probe's progress on his private screen. The alien intelligence was about to learn about humanity, but not in the way it expected. The probe would carry back information that would terrify the galactic hegemony, information that would make them think twice before attacking human space. Pilot Yunbi turned from her console and caught the captain's eye. Sir, should we prepare for the next phase? Not yet, Dongwu replied. Let them think they are in control. Let their probe see what we want it to see. When it returns to their ship with our gift of knowledge, then we will show them what human hospitality really means. The alien probe continued its work, unaware that it was not discovering human secrets, but rather being carefully educated in human nature. Every file it copied, every memory it accessed, every piece of data it gathered, had been selected to send a very specific message to whoever analyzed it. The message was simple. Humanity was not like other species. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and completely willing to die before accepting defeat. More importantly, humans had been preparing for galactic war for generations, and they were very, very good at it. As the probe worked deeper into the ship's systems, the real education was about to begin. The bio-neural probe moved through the human ship like a curious ghost, sliding from system to system with ease. To the alien intelligence controlling it, everything seemed normal. The ship's computers were primitive compared to hegemony technology, using crude binary systems instead of the elegant quantum matrices that powered advanced civilizations. Communications specialist Wu Jin watched the probe's progress on his hidden monitor. His fingers moved quietly over his keyboard, opening doors for the alien intelligence while closing others. Every path the probe took had been planned months in advance. Every file it would discover had been carefully placed and edited. The probe is accessing our historical databases now, Wu Jin whispered into his headset. From his command chair, Captain Dongwu nodded. Good, let it see our past. Make sure it understands what we are. The probe began copying what it believed were authentic human historical records. The first files it found seemed normal enough. Records of early human civilization, the development of agriculture, the growth of cities. But as it dug deeper, the alien intelligence began to encounter something disturbing. These humans seemed to fight constantly. The probe studied records of something called the 100 Years' War and was confused. How could any species sustain conflict for so long? It found documentation of 2 massive global conflicts within a single century, wars so destructive they reshaped entire continents. But what puzzled the probe most was that humans seemed to learn from each war how to make the next one even more terrible. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Yu-Jin was carefully monitoring the probe's emotional responses. The alien intelligence was designed to remain calm and analytical, but she could detect growing confusion in its data patterns. It was encountering information that did not fit with its understanding of how intelligent species should behave. The probe accessed what appeared to be tactical manuals from human military history. It read about something called total war and struggled to understand the concept. Why would any species deliberately target civilian populations? Why would they destroy their own infrastructure rather than let enemies capture it? The idea of scorched earth tactics seemed illogical and wasteful, but as the probe continued reading, it began to realize that these were not isolated incidents. They were patterns. Humans had used these tactics repeatedly throughout their history, against many different enemies in many different conflicts. Tactical Officer So Young smiled as she watched the probe's confusion grow. The alien intelligence was trying to rationalize what it was seeing. It kept looking for evidence that these were exceptions, unusual events that did not represent normal human behavior. But the more it searched, the more examples it found. The probe discovered records of human soldiers who continued fighting after losing arms or legs. It found documentation of battles where humans had been outnumbered 10-1 but refused to surrender. Most disturbing of all, it found evidence that humans considered these defeats to be victories if they inflicted enough damage on their enemies. Probe is accessing personal combat records now, reported Security Chief Minho from his station. It is studying individual soldier profiles. The alien intelligence began reading what it thought were authentic military service records. It learned about human soldiers who had volunteered for dangerous missions with casualty rates over 90%. It discovered that humans actually competed for the honor of undertaking suicidal assignments. The probe tried to understand this behavior by comparing it to other species in the galaxy. Most civilized races fought only when necessary, using precise tactics to minimize casualties and damage. War was seen as a failure of diplomacy, something to be ended as quickly as possible with the least amount of suffering. But humans seemed to approach warfare differently. They studied it like a science, practiced it like an art, and embraced it like a religion. The probe found evidence of human children playing war games, of civilians training for combat just in case, of entire populations preparing for conflicts that might never come. In the engine room, Engineer Jin Ho was carefully feeding the probe technical specifications for human weapons. But these were not the real specifications. They were simplified versions designed to make human technology appear primitive, while hinting at its true potential. The probe studied designs for human nuclear weapons and was initially relieved. The technology was crude, inefficient, and clearly limited in scope. But then it noticed something strange. Humans had built thousands of these weapons. They had created enough nuclear firepower to destroy their own planet several times over. The alien intelligence paused in its analysis. Why would any species build so many planet-killing weapons? The logical response to developing such technology would be to build a few for deterrence and then focus on more precise, controlled weapons. But humans had done the opposite. They had built massive arsenals and then spent decades pointing them at each other. Commander Velthara was growing impatient on the bridge of the Void Whisper. How much longer until the probe completes its analysis? The probe is encountering some difficulty, Commander, her scanner officer replied. The human information systems are more complex than expected. There are many redundant files. What the scanner officer did not understand was that the probe was becoming overwhelmed by the sheer volume of violent content it was discovering. Every human historical period seemed to be defined by conflict. Every human culture had developed sophisticated ways of waging war. Every human technological advancement had been turned into a weapon. The probe accessed what appeared to be human entertainment media and found its confusion growing worse. These creatures created stories about war for enjoyment. They made games that simulated combat. They wrote songs celebrating battles and death. Even their children's stories often involved conflict and violence. Ship's counselor Na-Young watched the probe's psychological state with professional interest. The alien intelligence was experiencing something like cognitive dissonance. It was trying to understand a species that seemed to embrace everything that civilized creatures should fear. The probe began studying human philosophy and religion, hoping to find evidence of a peaceful, rational worldview that would explain away the violence. Instead, It found concepts like just war and holy war, and necessary sacrifice. It discovered that humans had created elaborate moral frameworks to justify and even sanctify combat. Most disturbing of all, the probe learned that humans had developed something called mutually assured destruction. They had deliberately created military strategies based on the certainty that everyone would die. The alien intelligence struggled to process this concept. How could any species survive by planning for total annihilation? Navigator Sung-Ho quietly adjusted the probe's access to navigation records. He allowed it to discover human star charts that showed their expansion into space. But these charts told a story that made the alien intelligence even more uncomfortable. Humans had not expanded peacefully into the galaxy. They had not sent out explorers and diplomats and scientists. They had sent out military fleets. They had established fortified bases on every world they colonized. They had built their entire spacefaring civilization like an army preparing for war. The probe found evidence of human military doctrines that seemed impossible to believe. Humans planned to fight battles in the vacuum of space. They designed weapons that could destroy entire star systems. They created strategies for warfare on a galactic scale, planning campaigns that would last for centuries. Pilot Yunbi checked her instruments and saw that the probe was beginning to access more recent files. Soon it would discover information about current human military capabilities. The alien intelligence was about to learn that everything it had seen so far was just the beginning. The probe accessed personnel, files for the crew of the Iron Mountain, and began studying individual humans in detail. It expected to find soldiers, trained warriors who had been specially selected for their aggression and violence. Instead, it found something much worse. These humans were normal. They were engineers and doctors and communication specialists. They had families and hobbies and peaceful interests. But buried in their psychological profiles were combat assessments that made the probe's circuits freeze in shock. Every single human on this ship was prepared to die for their species. Not just the soldiers, everyone. The doctor had detailed plans for turning medical supplies into weapons. The engineer knew how to overload the ship's reactor to create a massive explosion. The pilot had memorized ramming courses that would maximize damage to enemy vessels. The alien intelligence began to realize that it was not studying a military vessel crewed by warriors. It was studying a normal human ship crewed by normal humans. And if these ordinary people were prepared for such extreme violence, what would human soldiers be like? The probe tried to find evidence of human civilians who were not involved in military planning. It searched for peace movements, for populations that opposed war, for any sign that normal human society was different from their military forces. Instead, it found that human civilians regularly trained for combat. They practiced emergency procedures that involved fighting alien invaders. They taught their children how to survive in war zones. The probe pushed deeper into the human ship's systems, seeking answers that would make sense of what it had already discovered. Medical Officer Yu Jin had prepared the next level of files carefully. She knew that the alien intelligence was becoming confused and frightened. Now it was time to show it something that would challenge everything it thought it knew about intelligent life. The probe accessed what appeared to be psychological evaluation files for the ship's crew. These were supposed to be private, confidential records that revealed the true mental state of each human aboard. The alien intelligence eagerly began reading, hoping to find evidence that the violence it had discovered was aberrant behavior, displayed by mentally unstable individuals. Instead, it found the opposite. The probe read the psychological profile of engineer Jin Ho, a quiet man who spent his free time reading poetry and growing plants in the ship's hydroponics bay. The evaluation marked him as psychologically stable and well-adjusted, but buried in the same file were detailed assessments of his willingness to sacrifice himself for the mission. Jin Ho had been asked hypothetical questions during his evaluation. If the ship was boarded by enemies, would he be willing to overload the reactor to prevent capture? Yes, without hesitation. If the engine room was compromised, would he stay at his post even if it meant certain death? Yes, he considered it his duty. If ordered to turn the ship into a weapon that would destroy both vessels, would he comply? Yes, and he had already calculated the most effective way to do it. The alien intelligence paused in shock. This was not the profile of a fanatic or a mentally disturbed individual. This was the evaluation of a normal, healthy human being, and according to his file, His responses were completely typical for his species. The probe quickly accessed more psychological files, hoping to find humans who thought differently. It read about pilot Yunbi, who loved music and spent hours teaching navigation to younger crew members. Her evaluation was equally positive, describing her as compassionate, intelligent, and emotionally balanced. But when asked about combat scenarios, Yunbi had calmly discussed ramming tactics that would maximize damage to enemy ships. She had studied the mathematical principles of collision dynamics to make her suicide attacks more effective. She spoke about these plans with the same casual tone she used to discuss stellar navigation. The probe's circuits began to overheat as it tried to process this information. How could beings be both compassionate and utterly ruthless? How could they be emotionally balanced while planning their own deaths? Commander Kyung-min's file was even more disturbing. As the ship's executive officer, he was responsible for crew welfare and morale. His psychological evaluation praised his leadership skills and his genuine care for the people under his command. But the same evaluation noted his complete willingness to order those same people to die if the mission required it. The probe read transcripts of simulated command scenarios where Kyung-min had been tested. In one exercise, he was told that the ship was surrounded by enemy vessels and that surrender might save the lives of his crew. His response was immediate and unwavering. He would rather see every human on the ship die than allow the enemy to capture their technology and use it against other human worlds. The alien intelligence tried to rationalize this by assuming that humans were simply trained to give these responses. Perhaps their military conditioning overrode their natural instincts for self-preservation. But as it continued reading, it discovered that these attitudes existed long before any military training began. The probe accessed what appeared to be childhood education records and found something even more terrifying. Human children were taught about heroic deaths from an early age. They learned stories of individuals who sacrificed themselves for others, who chose death before dishonor, who fought impossible odds rather than surrender. These were not propaganda stories designed to create soldiers. They were fundamental cultural myths that shaped how humans understood concepts like duty, courage, and moral behavior. The alien intelligence realized that humans were not trained to be violent. They were raised from birth to see sacrifice and conflict as noble pursuits. Security Chief Minho's psychological profile revealed another disturbing pattern. The evaluation noted his strong protective instincts and his dedication to keeping the crew safe. But when asked about security protocols, Minho had outlined plans that assumed every crew member would fight to the death before allowing the ship to be captured. His security measures included explosive charges placed throughout the ship that could be detonated manually. In the event of boarding, sections of the vessel could be sealed and depressurized, forcing attackers to fight in vacuum, while the human crew continued operating normally in their emergency suits. Most chilling of all, Minho had calculated exactly how long each crew member could survive in various emergency scenarios, not to help them survive longer, but to know how much fighting capacity the ship would retain as conditions deteriorated. The probe accessed communication logs and found recordings of casual conversations between crew members. It listened to engineer Jin Ho discussing reactor modifications with his assistants, calmly explaining how the same improvements that made the ship more efficient could also be used to create a catastrophic explosion. It heard pilot Yunbi teaching a navigation class, showing students how to calculate orbital mechanics. But her examples all involved collision courses with enemy vessels, as if ramming attacks were a normal part of space navigation. The alien intelligence began to understand that human military doctrine was not separate from human culture. It was an expression of human nature itself. These creatures had evolved on a world where survival required constant struggle, and they had never lost that fundamental drive to fight. The probe discovered files about Earth, the human homeworld, and learned about the environment that had shaped this species. It was a planet where massive predators had once ruled, where natural disasters regularly wiped out entire regions, where the climate itself seemed designed to test the limits of survival. Humans had not just survived on this world, they had conquered it. They had hunted predators to extinction, learned to predict and control natural disasters, and reshaped their entire planet to suit their needs. And when Earth could no longer challenge them, They had looked to the stars for new struggles to overcome. Ship's counselor. Na Young's file provided the most disturbing insights of all. As the ship's psychological specialist, she was responsible for maintaining crew mental health during long missions. The probe expected to find evidence of stress, depression, and psychological breakdown among humans, forced to live in the confined space of a warship. Instead, it found that the crew was thriving. They were happy, motivated, and eager to carry out their mission. Na Young's reports noted that the possibility of combat actually improved crew morale. Humans seemed to function better when they had a clear enemy to fight and a meaningful way to die. The probe read Na Young's analysis of human psychological needs and discovered something that made its circuits freeze in terror. According to her research, humans required conflict to maintain mental health. They needed challenges to overcome, obstacles to fight, and risks to face. Without these things, they became depressed, listless, and sometimes violent toward each other. The alien intelligence realized that war was not an unfortunate necessity for humans. It was a psychological requirement. These creatures literally needed enemies to fight in order to remain mentally stable. Navigator Sung Ho's files revealed the scope of human strategic thinking. His navigation records showed detailed maps of the galaxy, but they were not exploration charts. They were invasion routes. Every star system had been analyzed for its military potential. Every planet evaluated as either a strategic resource or a potential threat. The probe discovered that humans had been planning for galactic war since before they had achieved faster-than-light travel. They had spent decades mapping enemy positions, calculating supply routes, and designing weapons for conflicts that had not yet begun. Most terrifying of all, the probe learned that the Iron Mountain was not a unique vessel. It was one of hundreds of ships designed specifically to make first contact with alien species. Each ship was prepared to sacrifice itself to gather intelligence about potential enemies, and every crew member aboard was considered expendable. The alien intelligence began to realize that it was not studying prisoners or refugees or even soldiers. It was studying bait. The humans had deliberately allowed their ship to be found and boarded. They wanted the probe to discover this information. They wanted their enemies to know what they were facing. As the probe prepared to access the deepest levels of the ship's computer systems, it detected something that made its circuits scream in digital terror. Hidden beneath all the files it had been reading was another layer of data, the real information about human military capabilities. And according to the timestamps, the humans had been watching the probe's progress the entire time. The trap was about to close, and the alien intelligence finally understood that it had not been gathering intelligence about humans. It had been receiving a carefully crafted message designed to spread fear throughout the galaxy. The probe's circuits burned with digital panic as it realized the truth. Every file it had accessed, every piece of information it had gathered had been deliberately placed for it to find. The humans had not been hiding their nature. They had been revealing it piece by piece, like a predator slowly showing its teeth. Security Chief Min Ho allowed the probe to access what appeared to be classified military doctrine. The alien intelligence desperately hoped these files would show that the violence it had discovered was limited to extreme situations, used only as a last resort when all other options had failed. Instead, it found something infinitely worse. The probe read about human concepts of acceptable casualties and discovered that humans routinely planned operations where most participants would die. But these were not desperate last stands or suicidal missions born from hopelessness. They were carefully calculated strategies where massive losses were considered a reasonable price for victory. It learned about force multiplication tactics where small, human units were designed to inflict disproportionate damage on larger enemy forces. The key to these strategies was not superior technology or clever positioning. It was the human willingness to die in ways that would cause maximum harm to their opponents. The probe studied battle plans where human commanders had deliberately sacrificed entire fleets to gather intelligence about enemy capabilities. It found strategies that involved luring enemies into traps by offering apparently vulnerable targets, then destroying everything in massive explosions that would eliminate both sides. Most disturbing of all, the probe discovered that these were not theoretical exercises. They were based on actual historical battles where humans had used these exact tactics against each other. The strategic thinking that had allowed them to survive and conquer their homeworld was now being applied to galactic warfare. Communications. Officer G1's files revealed the true scope of human preparation for galactic conflict. Her communication logs showed contact with hundreds of other human ships scattered throughout the galaxy. Each vessel was gathering intelligence about different alien species, mapping their territories, studying their weaknesses. The probe realized that the Iron Mountain was not alone. While it had been focused on this single ship, an entire network of human vessels had been quietly infiltrating alien space. They had been watching, learning, and preparing for a war that most galactic civilizations did not even know was coming. The alien intelligence accessed what appeared to be standard diplomatic protocols and found its worst fears confirmed. Humans had studied every major galactic civilization in detail. They knew the political structures, military capabilities, and cultural weaknesses of dozens of species. But this was not intelligence gathered for peaceful coexistence or trade negotiations. Every file was organized around one central question. How could this species be defeated in the shortest time with the minimum human casualties? The probe read tactical assessments that divided the galaxy's inhabitants into categories. Some species were marked as potential allies, not because humans wanted friendship, but because these races might be useful tools in the coming war. Others were labeled primary threats or secondary targets based on their military potential and strategic value. Most chilling of all, some species were marked as acceptable losses. These were civilizations that humans had determined would inevitably be destroyed in the galactic war that was coming. The humans had already written them off as casualties, planning around their extinction as if it were a natural disaster rather than a consequence of human actions. Engineer Jin Ho's technical files revealed the terrifying reality of human military technology. The probe had initially been relieved by the primitive appearance of human weapons and ships. Now it discovered that this primitiveness was deliberate camouflage. The Iron Mountain appeared to be built from crude metal and simple electronics. But the probe's deeper scans revealed technology that was decades ahead of anything in the galactic hegemony's arsenal. The ship's hull was not just armor. It was a sophisticated metamaterial that could absorb and redirect energy attacks. The simple-looking engines were actually exotic matter drives capable of speeds that should have been impossible. Most terrifying of all, the probe learned that human weapons were designed around a principle that no other galactic civilization had ever considered. Mutual destruction was preferable to defeat. Every human weapon system was built to inflict maximum damage even when the user was being destroyed. The probe accessed files about human planet crackers, weapons designed to shatter entire worlds. But these were not tools for conquest or intimidation. They were last resort weapons that humans would use on their own worlds rather than allow them to be captured by enemies. Medical Officer. Eugen's files provided insights into human biology that made the alien intelligence question everything it thought it knew about evolution. Humans were not just psychologically adapted for violence, they were physically designed for it. The probe learned that human bone density was far higher than necessary for survival on their homeworld. Their muscle fibers were arranged for explosive power rather than efficiency. Their cardiovascular systems could function at performance levels that would kill most other species. But most disturbing was human brain chemistry. The probe discovered that humans experienced neurochemical rewards for engaging in violent conflict. They literally felt pleasure when fighting, hunting, or overcoming enemies. Combat was not just a necessity for humans. It was a drug that their brains craved. The alien intelligence began to understand that humans had not learned to be violent. They had evolved to be violent. Every aspect of their biology, psychology, and culture was optimized for warfare and destruction. Ship's counselor Na Young's deepest files revealed the ultimate horror. Humans were not even fighting primarily for survival or resources. According to her psychological analyses, humans fought because they enjoyed it. They created conflicts when none existed, divided into opposing groups for the pleasure of competition, and invented reasons for war when peace lasted too long. The probe read case studies of human societies that had achieved perfect peace and prosperity. Instead of thriving, these civilizations had collapsed into depression, madness, and self-destruction. Humans literally could not survive without enemies to fight. Na Young's files contained theoretical models for long-term human development, and every scenario ended the same way. If humans ever achieved total victory over all external enemies, they would immediately turn their weapons on each other. The concept of permanent peace was not just unlikely for humans, it was biologically impossible. Navigator Sung Ho's deepest navigation files revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The probe accessed star charts that showed not just human expansion routes, but human extermination plans. These were detailed strategies for systematically destroying every non-human civilization in the galaxy. The plans were not motivated by hatred or fear or greed. They were simply logical extensions of human nature. Humans needed conflict to survive, and the most permanent way to ensure conflict was to eliminate all potential sources of peace. The probe discovered that humans had calculated exactly how long the Galactic War would last, how many species would be destroyed, and what the final casualty count would be. They had planned the genocide of entire civilizations with the same careful attention to detail that other species used for urban planning. Most terrifying of all, the humans had already begun implementing these plans. The probe accessed recent communication logs and learned that human fleets were already moving into position around major galactic civilizations. While the galactic hegemony had been focused on exploration and trade, humans had been quietly surrounding them. The alien intelligence realized that the galaxy was already at war. Most species just did not know it yet. Human forces had been in position for months, waiting for the signal to begin the largest military campaign in galactic history. Pilot Yunbi's navigation logs revealed that the Iron Mountain was not just gathering intelligence. It was a signal beacon. When the probe returned to the alien ship with its terrifying cargo of information, it would trigger the beginning of the human offensive. The probe tried to abort its mission, to purge the information it had gathered, and return to its ship without compromising the galactic hegemony's position. But it was too late. The human systems had been monitoring its every move, copying its own data, learning about alien technology even as it learned about human nature. Commander Velthera and her crew thought they were studying a primitive species. In reality, they had handed humanity detailed intelligence about hegemony ship design, weapon systems, and military capabilities. The probe made one final, desperate attempt to escape the human ship's systems. It tried to delete itself, to destroy its accumulated data before it could return to endanger its creators. But the humans had anticipated this as well. Captain Dongwu's voice echoed through the ship's communication system, speaking directly to the alien intelligence for the first time. "Did you really think we would let you leave without our gift?" His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You came here to learn about us. Now you understand what we are. Take that knowledge back to your people. Let them know that humanity is coming." The bio-neural probe raced back to the Void Whisper carrying its cargo of terror. Every circuit in its artificial mind screamed warnings about what it had discovered. But it had no choice except to complete its mission. The human systems had ensured that it would deliver every piece of information it had gathered, whether it wanted to or not. Commander Velthera waited impatiently on the bridge of her ship. Unaware that her probe was about to deliver the most horrifying intelligence report in galactic history, she expected to receive tactical data about a primitive species that could be easily conquered. Instead, she was about to learn that her civilization was already doomed. "Commander," her scanner officer called out, his voice tight with confusion, "I am detecting unusual energy signatures in the surrounding space." Velthera turned toward the main screen, expecting to see the empty darkness of space around the disabled human vessel. Instead, she saw dozens of ships materializing out of nothing, their hulls dark and angular like mechanical predators emerging from a nightmare. "Where did they come from?" she demanded. "Unknown, Commander. They appear to have been using some form of advanced stealth technology. They must have been here the entire time watching us." On the bridge of the Iron Mountain, Captain Dongwu smiled as he watched the alien ship's desperate scans. Communications Officer Ji-Wan had been monitoring every transmission from the Void Whisper, listening to their growing panic as they realized the trap they had fallen into. "Sir," reported Weapons Officer Taeho, "all human vessels are in position. We have the alien ship completely surrounded." "They cannot escape." "Good," Dongwu replied. "But remember, our mission is not to destroy them. We need them to carry our message back to their people. Fear is a more powerful weapon than any missile." The bio-neural probe docked with the Void Whisper and began uploading its data to the ship's central computer. Velthara watched as her analysis system started processing the information, expecting to see the usual reports about primitive technology and predictable behavior patterns. Instead, her computer screens filled with warnings and error messages. The data was so disturbing that her ship's artificial intelligence began questioning whether the probe had been corrupted by some kind of psychological warfare virus. Computer, display primary analysis of the target species, Velthara commanded. The main screen flickered and showed a summary that made her blood freeze in her veins. Species designation, human threat level. Maximum recommendation, avoid all contact warning. Species demonstrates extreme aggression and suicidal tendencies. Warning, entire species appears to be militarized. Warning, technology levels deliberately concealed. Warning, species has been preparing for galactic warfare. This cannot be correct, Velthara whispered. Run the analysis again. But the computer's second analysis was even worse. As it processed more of the probe's data, it began to understand the true scope of what the aliens had discovered. The humans were not just another species to be catalogued and conquered. They were something that had never existed in the galaxy before, an entire civilization built around the concept of perpetual warfare. Velthara read the probe's reports about human history and felt her worldview crumbling. Every major human advancement had been driven by military necessity. Their space program had been developed to deliver weapons across continents. Their computer systems had been designed to calculate missile trajectories. Their medical knowledge had been gained by studying battlefield injuries. But what terrified her most was learning that humans were not unusual among their own kind. The crew of the Iron Mountain were not specially selected warriors or fanatics. They were normal representatives of their species. If these ordinary humans were prepared for such extreme violence, what would human soldiers be like? The probe's data included psychological profiles of the human crew, and Velthara read them with growing horror. These creatures talked about dying for their cause with the same casual tone that her own people used to discuss the weather. They had made detailed plans for turning their own ship into a weapon, and they seemed excited about the possibility of using those plans. "Commander," her communications officer called out, his voice shaking. "We are receiving a transmission from the human vessel." Captain Dongwu's face appeared on the main screen, his expression calm and professional. Behind him, Velthara could see the human bridge crew working quietly at their stations. They looked so normal, so civilized, that for a moment she hoped the probe's data had been wrong. "Greetings," Dongwu said in perfect hegemony standard language. "I am Captain Dongwu of the Earth vessel Iron Mountain. I believe your probe has completed its mission." How do you speak our language?" Velthara stammered. Dongwu smiled, and there was something predatory in his expression. "We have been studying your people for quite some time, Commander. We know your language, your technology, your military capabilities, and your weaknesses. We know everything about you." Navigator Sung Ho stepped into view behind the captain. "Your probe was very thorough in its information gathering. Unfortunately for you, it was also very informative for us. We now have complete technical specifications for your ship, your weapons, and your defensive systems." Velthara felt panic rising in her chest. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Dongwu replied. "We want you to return to your people and share what your probe discovered. We want your leaders to understand what they are facing." Tactical Officer So Young moved to another console and began reading from her screen. "Your civilization controls approximately 47 star systems with a combined population of 60 billion individuals. Your military consists of 3,800 vessels of various classes. Your primary weapons are plasma-based energy systems with an effective range of approximately 50,000 kilometers. Thara's blood turned to ice as she realized the humans knew more about her own civilization than she did. Security Chief Min Ho stepped forward with a data pad in his hands. "We have identified the locations of your primary military bases, your shipyards, your command centers, and your population centers. We have calculated the minimum force required to neutralize each target. We know about your alliance with the Krex Federation," added Medical Officer Yu Jin. "We know about your trade agreements with the Vorthan Empire. We know about every defensive pact and military treaty your people have signed." Engineer Jin Ho spoke up from his position. "We have also identified the critical vulnerabilities in your star systems. Your people have become dependent on centralized power distribution. and automated food production. Destroying a few key facilities would cause cascading failures that would cripple entire worlds. Velthara realized that while her probe had been learning about human nature, the humans had been conducting their own intelligence operation. They had been studying her ship, copying her computer files, and learning everything they needed to know to destroy her entire civilization. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ship's counselor Nayung smiled, and the expression was somehow more terrifying than any weapon. "Because fear is more effective than force, Commander. When you return to your people and share what you have learned, they will understand that resistance is futile." Captain Dongwu stepped closer to the screen. "We could destroy your ship right now. We could eliminate your entire fleet before it even knew we were here. But that would only teach your people about human weapons. We want them to understand human nature. Your probe discovered that we are not like other species in the galaxy," continued Pilot Yunbi from her station. "We do not fight for territory or resources or political advantage. We fight because fighting is what we are. We cannot be negotiated with, bribed, or reasoned out of our aggression." Communications specialist Wu Jin activated his console and began broadcasting on all frequencies. "We are sending your ship the complete specifications for human military doctrine. Study it carefully. Share it with your leaders. Let them understand what they are facing." Velthara watched in horror as her ship's computers were flooded with human tactical manuals, strategic plans, and weapon specifications. But these were not the primitive designs her probe had initially discovered. These were the real plans showing technology that was centuries ahead of anything in the galaxy. "This is impossible," she breathed. "How can you have developed such advanced weapons while appearing so primitive?" "Because we wanted you to underestimate us," Dongwu replied. "We have been preparing for this moment for decades. Every human ship you encounter, every human colony you discover, has been designed to appear weak while concealing overwhelming strength." Commander Kyung Min stepped into view. "Your civilization has been peaceful for so long that you have forgotten how to fight a real war. You think in terms of limited conflicts with acceptable casualties and negotiated settlements. You cannot comprehend total warfare. Humans do not accept partial victories or conditional surrenders," added Engineer Jin Ho. "When we go to war, it is for complete and permanent elimination of our enemies. We will not stop until every threat to humanity has been destroyed." Velthara felt the last of her hope crumble as she realized the truth. "You are planning to destroy everyone, aren't you? Every non-human species in the galaxy.